Hello and welcome. My name is Joseph Irasheta. I have a master's in pharmaceutics from the University of Washington, Seattle. I am currently an employee of Missouri Breaks Industries Research here on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. I am the lead author on the paper titled Diabetes and Kidney Disease in American Indians: Potential Role for Sugar-Sweetened Beverages, in conjunction with the Richard Johnson Lab from the Anschutz Medical Center, University of Colorado, Denver. Our paper represents a review of the available literature and a call to policy change and research action for American Indian communities. As with many populations, there has been a marked increase of obesity and its associated conditions of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and chronic kidney disease. American Indians currently represent 5.2 million people in the United States, or 1.7% of the total U.S. population. It can be argued that the prevalence of several negative health outcomes is the highest in this population. For obesity, nearly 40% of adult American Indians are obese, with a startling recent increase of childhood obesity. 18% of American Indians are diabetic, and in terms of end-stage renal disease, American Indians have a 60% greater incidence, and if diabetic, have a 7-fold higher risk for end-stage renal disease. American Indians differ from other populations with rising obesity in that they seem to have less than expected rates of hypertension and cardiovascular disease, but some studies, like the Strong Heart study, have shown that both are on the rise or have already matched the rates of non-native groups. These differences in presentation of end-stage renal disease, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease in American Indians with obesity has led researchers to look for genetic explanations. Our paper cites 27 different genes with variations associated with diabetes, obesity, or chronic kidney disease. We've separated these studies into either American Indian, Mexican and Mexican American, or the off-cited and intensely researched Pima Indians. We also reference the angiotensin-converting enzyme insertion that's found in high frequency in many American Indian populations. We feel that this might be in part responsible for the cardioprotective effects found in other studies, and indeed has been cited in European and European American studies as being cardioprotective. We hope that in the future it can be a leverage point for intervention for American Indians with obesity, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease, and is at least worthy of further research. Our paper also recognizes that within the last 500 years, they have undergone a dietary shift toward the Western European diet. And though 500 years is a long time, it is relatively recent biologically. Here we cite the Tarahumara, who still run very long distances on a daily basis, and in the past have been known to run their prey down on foot. We suggest that many American Indian populations had similar behaviors which they no longer employ. We also recognize that there was a shift from hard-to-digest tubers and starches to the more Western European diet of easily digested sugars and white flour. We also comment that their diet was highly reliant on wild game, which has been shown to have a more favorable omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid composition. From the previous slide, one can intelligently infer that there's an interaction between genes and environment. This is further corroborated by studies in the US and Mexican Pima. Here you can see that the US Pima have a higher prevalence of obesity and diabetes than do their Mexican counterparts, even though presumably they have the same genetics. This has led social determinant researchers to suggest that social drivers of health outcomes are much more powerful than genetic ones. Such things as social stress, impoverished environment, and access to appropriate diets have been cited. However, we are also asking researchers to take into account that many of these studies are small in number, small in sample size, and combined tribes with different cultural practices, geographies, and admixture histories. We also acknowledge that there's been many studies done in the Pima, but they may not be representative of American Indians as a whole. We'd also like to remind researchers that much of the research that is labeled Native American either comes from Mexico or comes from the Human Genome Diversity Project's data, which mostly contains samples from Central America and South America. As we inferred from the Puma example, we can see that obesity associations might not be purely genetic. We recognize in our paper that obesity and associated conditions are on the rise in many communities around the world that do not share ancestry. It is likely that social determinants or some unknown contributor is common among varying groups and explains similar phenotypic responses. Here in this paper, the FTO gene that's associated with obesity has a much stronger association with BMI in people born after 1942. Here at the end of our paper, we suggest that sugar might be the common factor between groups. Where in the recent past, sugar and high fructose corn syrup simply represented a ubiquitous source of empty calories, Dr. Johnson's research has been making the case with mouse models and human genetic association studies for sugar's mechanistic role in metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. In some studies, it has been noted that in obese and non-obese American Indians, they show an elevated level of serum uric acid. In the Strong Heart study, this elevated level of uric acid has been associated with 3 urate transporters, URAT1, ABCG2, and SLC2A9. Here with Dr. Johnson's work, we begin to suggest that there may be an interaction between these urate transporter genes and fructokinase variants that exacerbate obesity, diabetes, and kidney injury. However, in a study with Mexican Americans and Euro Americans, these fructose variants showed a protective effect in the Mexican American group. As Mexican Americans share 30 to 60% of their heritage with American Indians, it would be worthwhile to study groups of American Indians to see where these differences lie. However, there are special considerations when doing research in American Indian communities that have precluded more research taking place. Part of this consideration stems from the unique nation-to-nation relationship between the tribes and the federal government. This relationship, its antecedents and consequences, make interpretation and comparisons with other groups very difficult outside this context. American Indians often live in areas that are considered beautiful, pristine, and otherwise healthy. However, they suffer from poverty, violence, racism, and cultural isolation from being made to feel like they're strangers on their own land. Our paper calls for more research in these populations with special considerations for these issues of culture, politics, and specifically statistical validation. We are also calling for the much needed funds for public health workers, public health research, and public health intervention to reduce disparities like obesity, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease that are at epidemic rates in this community. Once again, my name is Joseph Irshada. I thank you for your patience, and I wish you a good day.